Hello everyone. We'll just wait another couple of minutes for others to join and then we'll get started. Right. Others will join and for now we will just get started. So, good afternoon everyone and thank you for joining us today. I'm Isabel, I'm the Assistant Marketing Manager here at Danbro and I'll be hosting today's session. With the umbrella legislation changes coming into effect in the 6th of April, we know there's still a lot of questions around what this means in practice, especially when it comes to joint and several liability, agency risk and wider legal implications as well. So today is about giving you clear, practical insight into what's changing and what we're seeing in the market right now and what you should be thinking about. Today, joining me, we have Michael, Hannah and Deb, who bring a huge amount of experience across legislation, compliance and the recruitment supply chain. I'll hand it over to each of them now to quickly introduce themselves and explain their role in this space. So, Michael, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Izzy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Michael Howard, Head of Sales here at Danbro. I recognise quite a number of people on the webinar, but also some people that are relatively new to Danbro. So yeah, I think my main role here is about adding value, managing compliance and legislative change, and just making sure that Danbro are in aligning our business with your expectations as we move forward post-April.
Brilliant. Deb?
Hi all. I recognise a few names on here as well. I'm Deb Murphy, so I'm Head of Operations at FCSA. My role at FCSA is kind of behind the scenes, so I work with members, the assessors, recruiter partners, and looking at the wider compliance element, the impact on the supply chain. And I'm here today to kind of share some of the insights we've had from HMRC with you.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Hannah?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Hannah Morrison. I'm a specialist recruitment and employment lawyer at Brabner's. I've got over 10 years experience advising businesses across the labour supply chain, from umbrella companies to MSPs, on employment law and regulatory compliance.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. So if anybody has any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A chat and we'll discuss them after all the main questions have been answered. So to get started, I'll begin with our first question to Michael, which is, what are we seeing happen in the industry now? And what do you think this will mean for the industry long term?
Thanks, Izzy. Yeah, I think there's a lot going on. I managed to get myself an hour or two in between a few other external meetings, so it is going to be a very busy period, I think, if it's not already between now and April. But I think in summary, what are we seeing in the immediate short term? I think we're seeing a real focus on compliance leading the way when it comes to umbrella engagements, payroll partners. Clearly, the government have put in a number of changes over the number of years. You look at I-35 back in 2021 and 2017 to try and ensure that the right levels of tax and statuses were agreed. They've also brought in the Criminal Finance Act. They brought in onshore offshore legislation back in 2014. So the government have, I suppose, been on this journey for a while. It isn't just something that's hit us out of the blue, and we're all running around panicking. I think what we're seeing here is the government realizing that actually this industry is a phenomenal place to work in, one that supports a huge amount of people, contingent labour, to be able to make sure that it's got the right sort of compliance and the right levels of regulatory changes. In terms of what we've seen, I suppose these conversations started 12, 18 months since the consultation got brought out. And what we've seen from an umbrella provider is that agencies are becoming a lot more astute when it comes to who their partners are. Historically and up until April, from a PAYE tax and national insurance perspective, if an umbrella company sort of has a shortfall or has a challenge from HMRC, it's the umbrella's risk. And I think obviously with the liability changing in terms of where the risk will sit, and we'll come on to that, we're seeing a lot more focus around MSPs having panel of umbrella companies. We're seeing neutral vendors enforce panels of umbrella companies, and we're seeing, I would say, a more focused approach on how businesses are dealing with umbrella companies. Even if they don't have a direct engagement in the supply chain, they've got to be more aware. There's a lot more transparency across the supply chain. So whereas MSPs and neutral vendors may lean on the agencies to sort out the compliance elements, I think they've had a lot more dealings over the last 6 to 12 months in ensuring that actually, if they're going to have any potential liability in the future, they want to be able to make sure that they can manage that a lot more than what they ever have done.
Okay.
So I think in the immediate, I think what we're seeing is migrations of workers, maybe moving from umbrella companies to umbrella companies that are on certain lists, from MSPs, from agencies, from neutral vendors, and that will go on between now and probably the end of March, beginning of April, before the joint and several liability crystallizes. In terms of what I see long term, I think there'll be a consolidation. I think there'll be a wave of umbrella companies where the ones that are being used will continually to be used more often. I think we may see some of the smaller umbrella companies merge or focus on SMEs where they can have direct relationships with recruitment agencies. I think overall the changes that the government are looking to achieve is good. We at Danbro see it as a positive step, because unfortunately, working in the industry for the last 16 years, there's always that tarnished reputation of umbrella companies taking money off me, umbrella companies are having too lots of national insurance, and even far back as Isle of Man offshore loan scheme. So we've not been able to shake that tree, unfortunately. Where I think if you look at the umbrella industry in the next 6, 12, 18 months, we'll be a positive industry, ensuring that we're doing all things correctly. We're working all in harmony to make sure that everybody's working correctly, and ultimately I think it's a positive step from the government. Obviously time will tell, and we'll see what the industry looks like in sort of 6 to 12 months, but fundamentally, short-term pain, like there will be with any legislation change. And there's already been a lot of noise from probably Christmas all the way up until probably the end of March, because contractors don't want to move. Unfortunately, there's a position that they may not have a choice. They're going to have to move. But I think short-term pain with long-term gain is ultimately a positive step in the right direction. And we're seeing the start of potentially umbrella companies working in a slightly different way, and agencies engaging with them in a slightly different way, to make sure that ultimately the transparency is there from top to bottom. So hopefully that's answered the question for you, Izzy.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, so off the back of that, so Deb, has the FCSA seen a change in agency behaviour at all?
I think it echoes quite a bit what Michael's already said there. Yes, we have seen a change. It's for the positive, and it's all surrounding compliance. So historically, agencies, not all agencies, I'll be the first one to say that, some agencies may have been driven more by the candidate and where the candidate wants to work, and maybe not conducted as much due diligence as they could have done.
Right.
What we have seen is agencies looking in more depth at the umbrella companies that they're working with. So they're taking a lot more care with who they're working with. They're knowing that company that they're working with. So they're knowing more about the umbrella. They're asking more questions of the umbrella.
Right.
I think that kind of links in with agencies using more tools to give them that visibility and transparency. So making use of things that are already out there in the market. So whether that's payslip checking, whether that's compliance packs, but taking a much more proactive approach. Similar to what Michael said in the sense of condensing lists and reducing PSLs, ASLs.
Yeah.
We have seen more move to FCSA members, where non-FCSA members might have been now taken off the list for the additional checks that are being done. I think it's not only from an agency level, we're seeing that up the chain as well. So end clients are requiring it of MSPs. If there's an MSP or just directly to agency, if there's an MSP in the chain, the MSPs are actually looking at what agencies are doing. So we're seeing it not from bottom up, we're seeing it from top down.
Right.
So the MSPs are wanting to know which umbrella the agencies are engaging with so they can try and mitigate their own risk. We've seen quite a number of dubious models spring up, and obviously quite quickly shut back down, chancing that they wouldn't be caught under this purported umbrella scenario. And I think all the guidance that we've had and the conversations we've had with the different departments at government policy level is, if it looks like an umbrella and it's paying like an umbrella, it's going to be caught under JSL. So they can invent all these weird and wonderful schemes, but the chances are, if you're payrolling somebody, depending on how you're doing it, it could be caught under the legislation. So there's no silver bullet to this. There's no kind of get out of jail free. Let's find a new model. Let's reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that purported umbrella will catch it. So, and I think that kind of makes sense then, that agencies are being slightly more, well, not slightly, they are being more selective with who they're working with.
Yeah.
We've definitely seen a rise in mandating FCSA members because of the extra additional transparency that's being shown.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you for that, Deb. I'll move on to the second question, which is again for Michael. So, do you see the umbrella company numbers reduced due to joint and several liability changes?
I suppose the honest answer is no.
Okay.
I think if you're an umbrella contractor, you choose that career because you want that flexible working. You don't maybe want to be a permanent member of staff. The contracting world is definitely one that's a lifestyle choice. I think if you've either heading into that direction or you've been in that sort of area for a while, you understand what requirements are. You probably get a lot more pay in terms of a permanent member of staff. Obviously, there's maybe less security, less pensions, less things like that. But ultimately, I don't see the number of umbrella contractors reducing. I think if you're a contractor and you're engaged, you can either have a limited company if you're outside I-35, or you can have an umbrella engagement if you're inside I-35, or go on the agency's payroll. I don't see that market or that industry shrinking or changing in any significant way. I think, like Debs has mentioned already, is that you may well see a bit of movement from workers being paid by one umbrella company compared to another. But in terms of, do I see the umbrella marketplace shrinking? I don't think umbrella contractors will shrink. Do I think the number of umbrella companies shrinking? The potential. We've already seen over the last 3 or 4 months certain MSPs and neutral vendors dictate that the supply chain have to use certain umbrella companies, and you may well see some winners and some losers in terms of certain lists that umbrella companies sit on. I suppose it's all around what that umbrella strategy and plan is for the foreseeable. There may well be some smaller umbrella companies that choose to sit in different circles than what they may have done before, different sectors, different specialisms. But I think each business has got their own plans for JSL. This isn't something new, as in it's the first time we've heard of it. The first consultation was probably 18 months ago. So I do think that the number of contractors within the umbrella world will remain positive and strong. but potentially there might well be an element of reduced number of umbrella companies as a total.
Right.
Some may merge, some may get acquired, some may just not want to continue. So it's a case of let's watch this space. We'll probably know a lot more in May or June,
Right.
because there'll be a sort of 6-week window now where we'll see a bit of movement, and then we'll probably reevaluate the industry in terms of competitors, in terms of umbrella companies that are out there, and we'll be in a bit of a different place than where we are now.
Brilliant. Okay. So this sort of interlinks with a question I was going to ask you, Hannah. So does TUP apply where an umbrella loses its place on a preferred supplier list and workers are transferred to another umbrella company, or where an agency decides to bring the payroll of workers in-house? Can you sort of gauge off what Michael said and explain that question?
Yeah, so I think off the back of what Michael and Deb have said, which I agree with, I think, we are already seeing, if not consolidation of the number of umbrella companies, at least consolidation of PSLs, or if agencies didn't have a PSL at all, our advice as lawyers is you absolutely need to put one in place, because if you or the master vendor above you is going to be jointly and severally liable for umbrella company PAYE, you want to know which umbrella companies you're working with, and you need to be doing really careful and detailed due diligence on them, and it's just not possible to do that on 10, 20, 30 umbrella companies. So we certainly are seeing PSLs start to reduce in size, and the effect of that, as Michael's already touched upon, is that in some cases umbrella contractors are being asked or being required to move from their current umbrella company, who may be coming off the PSL, to one of the umbrellas which is on the PSL. And from a legal perspective, one of the questions I've been asked quite a lot recently is whether 2P applies. So I imagine a lot of you will be familiar with the idea of 2P already, but it's a piece of legislation that's been around for a long time. And it basically applies where either one company is acquired by another, or where services that are being provided by one company, let's say one umbrella company, start to be provided by a different umbrella company who's on the PSL. And sometimes 2P can apply to transfer the employment of the employees from one company to the other, which means that the employee's continuity of service is preserved. So if they've been working with one umbrella company for 3 years, and if 2P applies when they move to a different umbrella company, then that 3 years continuous service would be preserved. It wouldn't be lost, which is obviously relevant for things like claiming unfair dismissal, or for entitlement to certain statutory payments, such as statutory paternity pay, maternity pay, for the sake of argument. And so, look, umbrella employees, contractors have moved between umbrella companies for years and years. That is not a new kind of notion, but I think it's happening in larger numbers at the moment, and it's more under the spotlight because you've got certain umbrella companies being removed from PSL, so you've potentially got large numbers of contractors moving around, and so this is sort of raising this question of, does 2P apply? And the other aspect of 2P is that if it does apply, not only does the employee's continuity of employment transfer, all their rights under their contract of employment transfer, so their new employer has to honour their existing employment terms, but also any liabilities that attach to them transfer as well. So for the sake of argument, if their current umbrella company might have been miscalculating holiday pay, miscalculating national minimum wage compliance, for the sake of argument, there is a 2P transfer, and after that transfer happens, let's say there's an HMRC investigation and it turns out that this employee is owed back pay or whatever it might be, that liability becomes the liability of their new employer, even though the actual mistake or the liability might have arisen previously when they were employed by the other umbrella company. So 2P has some quite significant implications, not just for the individual, but also for the new umbrella. And the thing is with 2P, and I'm going to sound like a really stereotypical lawyer here, but it's quite a grey area. There is not, unfortunately, a clearly defined answer to whether 2P applies in a particular case. It's very, very fact sensitive. So it depends on, what are the services that are being provided? Who are they being provided to? Is it services provided by the umbrella to the agency, or is it the services provided by the actual contractors to the end user client? That's not always clear. You then have to have a sort of organised grouping of contractors who are sort of dedicated to providing that service, whether it's to an end client or an agency. Quite often, umbrella companies don't organise their contractors in that way. It just sort of depends what assignments are sort of ongoing at any one time. So very, very broadly speaking, I would say in more cases than not, TUPE wouldn't apply when you've got contractors moving between umbrella companies, but it could, depending on the circumstances. So that does need to be considered in each case where you've got sort of consolidations of PSLs and contractors moving around. The other circumstance in which TUPE could potentially apply is if you have an agency that decides, actually, we're just going to stop using umbrella companies altogether, and any agency workers who are currently employed by that umbrella company, we're going to bring them in-house and put them on our books, put them on our contract, put them on our payroll. And that is another circumstance where potentially TUPE could apply. So thought just needs to be given to that. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't give you a straightforward answer, but what I can say is it needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis, and questions asked about, how many workers are we talking about? What are the assignments they're on? Are they all assigned to the same end user client? Is the umbrella company organising its contractors in this way?
Brilliant. Okay. So off the back of that, if anybody has any questions for Deb, Hannah and Michael so far, please do keep putting them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. So a sort of roll-on question from that then, Hannah, is, say I'm a recruiter, do I need to make changes to my contracts to reflect joint and several liability?
Yes, ideally you would, as an agency or as an MSP or another party further up the supply chain.
Okay.
Not least because if you are now going to be the one who's potentially on the hook for joint and several liability, you want transparency, you want to know what's going on. So you would want to kind of bake that transparency into your terms of business. So for example, if everyone's doing all this work to look at their PSL and they only want to deal with certain umbrella companies that are accredited and that, are financially robust, you want to make sure that they are the only umbrella companies that are being used, and that those umbrellas aren't, for example, subcontracting the employment to someone else beneath them in the supply chain that you don't know about, because that potentially creates a risk for you as an agency. So you would want, for example, your umbrella company to confirm within the terms of business that they're not going to subcontract the employment of any contractors without your sort of consent. You will want your contractual obligation on your umbrella companies to provide information on request, whether that's RTI information, whether it's compliance packs, whether it's information about the umbrella company's financial performance and stability. I think a lot of the way that the risk of JSL can be managed is through much more sort of free and transparent flow of information, so that the whole supply chain can see who's employed by who, where's the money going, has it been paid to HMRC, and so you'll want that sort of baked into your contracts. I've also had lots of agencies and MSPs saying recently, should we be asking for indemnities in our terms of business with umbrella companies? So if an agency is approached by HMRC with a notice of underpayment, you're jointly and severally liable for this umbrella company's underpaid PAYE. Right. The agency might want the ability to recoup that cost from the umbrella company under an indemnity under the terms of business. Now, you can do that. I mean, you can seek to agree the inclusion of indemnities. The sort of word of warning I would give with that is that an indemnity isn't worth the paper it's written on if the umbrella company doesn't have the financial means to pay up. So you might say, umbrella company, you have to reimburse us if we end up on the hook under JSL for paying a PAYE liability that you should have paid. But if that umbrella company, for example, has gone into administration or simply just doesn't have the financial resources to be able to honour that indemnity, then it's not much use to you. So I think the real focus of the advice that I've been giving to agencies and MSPs is not just to rely on, clever wording in the contract, because that's only really going to take you so far. What you really need to do is sort of roll your sleeves up and get into doing proper due diligence, and not just once when you agree which umbrellas are going to go on your PSL, but on a continuous basis.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that, Hannah. So this next question is for Deb. So, if multiple agencies use one umbrella, can just one agency be pursued for all the outstanding liability?
Okay, so we have gone and had this question clarified, and there was a little bit of misunderstanding perhaps out there. So in short, no.
Okay,
If JSL applies, the agency is only on the hook for their workers.
right.
You wouldn't be on the hook for agency B, C, and D. It's
Okay,
only the workers that you've sent for the pay that you've sent. They can't just go after the biggest agency, for example, for it all. Yeah, it's specific to worker to agency.
right. Okay. So, sort of rolling on from that then as well. So, how can an agency mitigate their risk?
Yeah, I think Hannah, you have covered some of those points, and I think the, the due diligence is where we start, and probably everything loops back to doing really good due diligence, knowing the companies that you're working with.
Yeah,
Um, you know, not just necessarily the contractor stamping the feet. I want to work with that company, and you've got to let me
yeah.
work with that company. If you are not comfortable, it's your ultimate risk at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, I think and that goes with MSP. So the MSP is a managed service provider. So where you have an end client who might just go out to one MSP or one neutral vendor, and then that company will have a selection of agencies sat underneath them.
Okay.
Um, it flows all the way down, so that MSP needs to know who they're working with.
Yeah.
So we speak to quite a few MSPs, and they can name their agencies, but they can't name the umbrellas underneath them.
Right. Okay.
So it's that transparency throughout the chain. I think Hannah, you touched on it, the reviewing financial stability. So looking at things, like management accounts.
Yeah.
FCSA require their members to have audited accounts. So just it's everything is coming back to transparency and having open conversations. Getting confirmation that your payments have been paid, because ultimately at any one time the maximum risk you could potentially be on the hook for is 6-7 weeks.
Right.
Obviously you pay on the 22nd of the following
Yeah.
month for your liabilities. Making sure you know that that's been paid and been paid in full, get evidence of that. Know when I said before, know who you're working with, actually have a documented supply chain mapping. So if you are the very top of that chain, understand what that tree looks like beneath you. And if there is a change, that everybody is expected to tell you that, so you know your risk. Something we didn't mention at the beginning, which probably should have done with when we were talking about what are we seeing, we are seeing end clients asking for umbrellas to be put into the chain or
Okay.
agencies to be put in the chain. So where an end client historically was working just with an agency or direct to an umbrella,
Yeah.
they're actually asking for that step process now, because it pulls the end client that bit further away from the risk.
Right.
Because depending on what contract they're on, it changes how that risk is factored. I think that due diligence point, understand what contracts are being used by the umbrella. So are they on a contract of employment? Or are they on a contract for services? Are they being treated as a worker?
Oh,
Being treated as CIS? So what we're seeing is lots of unknowns happen because communication isn't clear.
okay.
There's a risk with CIS where an end client may be telling an agency no CIS can apply in the chain. And if that information isn't going to the umbrella, and the umbrella then looks at it and says, yep, we'll treat them as CIS, they pass all the standards, that's absolutely fine. It potentially could end up purported because somebody in that chain knew that they should
Right.
have been umbrella. So whilst
Right.
everybody thinks they're out, they could actually get caught, even though CIS categorically is not caught under JSL.
Yeah.
And JSL, sorry, I know I'm using acronyms. Joint and Several Liability would be that one. I think, and just mapping everything you do, have an audit log of, checking your due diligence. It's not a once in the year, chuck it in the drawer and I've done my bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a bit of a story I always say with this one. A few years ago, I was speaking with an agency, and they had doubts about their compliance team and how it worked. So they suggested that the umbrella use the word pineapple randomly throughout the compliance documents. Agency team got it, said thank you very much, umbrella, pop it in the drawer. never to see light of day again. You know, those due diligence documents are only as good as the people checking them.
Yeah.
And granted, you know, we're not expecting or suggesting in any which way that the agency need to know all these legislation. But you know, if you're working with 5 umbrella companies, have the 5 out next to each other and compare the answers.
Yeah.
You know, if they're all saying this, you know, we do it this way, and this one saying, oh, we do it this way, go and
Fine.
explore that. It might be absolutely
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But you need to unpick it, not just take things at face value. And so yeah, you ask questions is probably how to mitigate risk.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Dev. Amazing. And then we have one final question that we're going to answer, and it is for Michael. So somebody has asked, what benefits will the joint and several liability have on the overall recruitment and umbrella sectors?
I suppose may have covered off some of these
Yeah.
already between the three of us.
Yeah.
But I suppose the overall benefits will be a clear transparency from top to bottom. The supply chains can vary quite a lot. You could have an end client engaged directly with an umbrella company. That does happen on occasions, and that's a little bit easier to manage because the end client's got the direct relationship with the umbrella company. I think when supply chains become a little bit more convoluted, whether there's a neutral vendor, master vendor, sourcing agency, that there could sometimes be 4 or 5 different suppliers within that supply chain. I think historically, apart from the actual entity paying the umbrella company, there's been no real relationship. There's no been real any visibility between what payment's been made based on a timesheet or a remittance, apart from 2 entities and 2 parties. I think what this has shown is that collectively supply chains have come together to ensure that what work has actually been signed off at the top line client, you know, is flown through the supply chain accurately and correctly. And as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, I think this is a real step in the right direction to remove the historical negative noise that umbrella companies historically have had because of the way that certain umbrella companies have maybe acted 10, 15 years ago. It still has that sort of unfortunate tangible information with the umbrella companies that you see today. And I think what this will do is this will hopefully align ourselves with what the government want, which is ultimately the right tax and now being paid on the work that's being delivered. And I think for us, it's a positive step. There's going to be a little bit of pain in the next 6 to 8 weeks with some workers, some businesses, some requirements. But I think if we fast forward 2 or 3 months, we'll all be in a BAU perspective. We'll all have the right umbrella panel. We'll all have a PSL that everybody needs to adhere to. And fundamentally, for any new placements in that supply chain, they'll probably use one of the companies that have been given as a listed option. So like with any legislation change, there's always going to be a little bit of negative noise and negative feedback and challenges. But I think this is really a positive step that, you know, this industry isn't regulated. You know, we're not a regulated industry. However, regulation has got to start somewhere. And I think this could potentially be a really, really good place for the industry to get to, showcase the good things that a lot of businesses do. You know, we're not just a payroll company. We do a lot of other things that goes on behind the scenes. And I think, we'll be in a much better, transparent position when it comes to tax and national insurance going forward.
Brilliant. Fabulous. Thank you for that. Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for all of your insights. They were brilliant. If we want to move on to some of the Q&A questions, if all the viewers want to put in any questions that they've got for the guys, we'll go through and start answering them now. So what I'll do is I'll read out a question, and which one it's most applicable to, please do answer. And we'll go from there. So Matthew has asked, do you have a standard due diligence checklist agencies could use? Who wants to go for that one?
I go on. I will.
Thanks,
we don't, but I can certainly
Okay.
put one together.
Amazing.
And I will share it out with Michael and Izzy, so they can get it to you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Deb. And then Tracy has asked, what is 2P? So I think that's one for you, Hannah.
Yeah, so that was so it's TUPE, which its long title is the Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations, which obviously is a mouthful, so we shorten it to TUPE. And that's the legislation I was talking about, which applies in certain circumstances where you've got services or employees moving between two companies, which might sort of port over their continuity of service, but also any rights or liabilities attaching to them as well.
Well, fabulous, thank you. So, Andrew has asked, who would HMRC go for in the chain first, as it seems unfair on the agency if they have done all the prior due diligence, but the umbrella has defaulted?
I'm happy to pick up on this one. I think, like it's been discussed throughout this webinar, I think, there's no hiding place. There's no, in the nicest world, excuse to say, oh, it's such and such's responsibility. In its current format, the umbrella company is responsible, and it's down to them to make sure they do the right levels of tax and national insurance payments to HMRC. But I think where the joint and several liability comes into effect is that it's now even more important for the business that's closest to the client. So that could be an MSP, neutral vendor, an agency, a client directly, to work closely with the supply chain to ensure that the right level of DD is completed. Like Debs and like Hannah have mentioned, that there's no excuse, there's no hiding place if there is ever a claim to be had. This isn't well, I've done my bit, it must be them that's done something wrong. We've all talked about potential, real-time live payslip checking solutions where partners in the supply chain can make sure that they've got a little bit more visibility in terms of what's being passed from one entity to another. I don't think that's, and there isn't a silver bullet here to make sure everybody, gets everything in one place. I think, payslip verification system is one really good option for you to make sure that you've got a little bit more visibility, but there needs to be a little bit more than that in terms of due diligence. There needs to be regular reports. There needs to be maybe regular information from the supply chain in terms of what people are actually doing. Umbrella companies, pop up all the time. Sometimes they go into financial challenges. So I think for me, with a lot of the due diligence packs that we've seen across the industry being asked for over the last 6 months, financial strength and stability has been a really, really big key focus. Ultimately, what percent of agencies do you work with that are on payment terms is another good one, because ultimately, the umbrella company could be standing their own cash for another agency. Could they default on that, and it could have an impact on other people?
Yeah.
So I think for me, this is where a lot of PSLs have been sort of looked at, is how secure is that umbrella company, and how financially stable is it, given the fact that these changes could impact a certain number of businesses in the supply chain. So I think, just going back to, I don't think there's any excuses anywhere else to hide. If you're doing the right thing, then that's great, but also you've got to understand what everybody else in the supply chain is doing, and make sure that you take ownership of the supply chain and not just your bit. There's got to be an element of audits and processes further on down the line.
If I could just pick up on that as well, actually. So this is the JSL legislation is what we call in legal terms a strict liability offence, which means that if you are the relevant party, and if there is a PAYE underpayment, then you are jointly and severally liable with the umbrella company, and there is no defence to say, I did reasonable due diligence. There is just no defence. If you are that relevant party in accordance with the definition, then you have the joint and several liability, irrespective of how much work you've tried to do to sort of clean up your PSL, which is, I know on the one hand, concerning, but it just emphasises the need for due diligence and the need for a very clear visibility of what's going on in your supply chain, because you can't get out of the liability if it arises. What you want to try and do is prevent it arising in the first place. So know that you've got a robust supply chain. Have, as Michael has been saying and Deb's been saying, pay slip checking, due diligence questions, supply of information, making sure that your umbrella company is financially robust, so that you can anticipate problems before they arise, and and potentially sort of cut them off at source, rather than discovering 3 years after the event that the umbrella company you've been using hasn't been accounting for PAYE correctly for the last 3 years. And just the other point that sort of ties in with what Michael was saying there, and with this question from Andrew, is that just to be really clear, you could be jointly and severally liable not just if an umbrella company has, say, fraudulently not paid PAYE, if there is whatever the cause is for the PAYE underpayment, including if the umbrella company has become insolvent, for example, if there is a debt owing to HMRC under PAYE and you're the relevant party, then you will be jointly and severally liable for that, which is why we're talking about, not just checking pay slips and whatnot, but checking the financial stability of the umbrella companies that you're working with. And when we're talking about things like credit terms, yes, there are sort of there are a reality of the commercial relationships in the supply chain, but also they can put an awful lot of pressure on the party at the bottom of the chain, i.e. the umbrella company, and from a cash flow perspective. And if very long credit terms are being offered to multiple agencies and one agency defaults, that could result in that umbrella company going under, and all the agencies through whom they're supplying temporary workers may end up with a joint and several liability obligation because the most recent sort of batch of PAYE hasn't been paid. So this isn't just about sort of fraud or businesses acting nefariously. It could be genuinely through mistake or through insolvency that there ends up with a debt owing.
And I think just to touch on that, and it's a really good point, is, we look back at I-35 and there's a little bit of, well, this entity's liable, but if this entity's taking reasonable care, then actually this other entity is now liable. I think, just sort of picking up on Hannah's point, there is no, I've taken as much reasonable care as I can, I've done my bit, I'm fine. That's not the case. So I think, I-35, there's been a little bit of ambiguity around reasonable care being taken place, so the liability might shift from one to another. This is a case of you take reasonable care to make sure that you and the other joint and several party are doing everything correctly. Otherwise, there is a HMRC case against you both. So I think it's really important, that point, Hannah, is that, there's no excuse, there's no ambiguity. It is a factual challenge that you, the liable party, and the umbrella would be chased up by HMRC should an umbrella company not do what they say they're going to do, which ultimately means that that's even more important for you to have close relationships, closer understanding of what other people are doing, and making sure you've got robust processes in place that you're not going to be caught out by any of these changes.
Brilliant, thank you. And just sort of to roll on to that, Michael, somebody has asked, is Danbro going to be SafeRec certified? Do you want to answer that?
I suppose we became SafeRec credited on Monday of this week. We've got relevant certificates, and I think we're on relevant websites already. So if anybody needs a copy of that, just shout up or drop us a note and we can send that over. Hopefully that helps with whoever's asked that question.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got a few questions in the chat, so I'll sort of pin and pick a few out, and then the rest of them we can get answered over email, and then we will make FAQs out of them as well, so you guys have access to that information in a different way. So Paul has asked, MSPs are asking suppliers for indemnification against JSL. Do you think that HMRC will take notice of any contract, or will they still go after the last in the chain? Who wants to go for that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. The
Fab.
short answer
Thanks,
is
Hannah.
no, HMRC don't care. If you have indemnities in your contract, if you are the relevant party, so let's say you're the MSP, and HMRC have come to you to pay the liability, they will not accept you saying, yeah, but the agency beneath me has given me an indemnity, so go after them. They will come after you because you are the relevant party, and then it's a separate matter whether you seek to recoup that loss from the agency beneath you pursuant to your indemnity, which is why I was saying before that, the potential risk you've got with indemnities is if the agency or the umbrella company can't actually back that up, financially, you've had to pay out to HMRC and you might not be able to recover that loss.
Right. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And then someone has asked, if we remove an umbrella from our PSL and move contractors elsewhere, are we at risk of triggering 2P or breaching existing contracts?
I think we've answered that one. Potentially you're at risk of triggering 2P, but it depends on the particular circumstances.
Yeah. Fabulous. Brilliant. So Julia's asked, Danbro is on our PSL for all workers working via an umbrella. We use no one else. What reassurances can you give us that we're in the right hands? So I think that's one for you, Michael.
Well, first of all, yeah, that's great that you're using Danbro. Fundamentally, we are putting together an agency pack. I think this will start to come out mid to late March with regards to additional information regarding insurances, regarding certificate accreditations, regarding management accounts, regarding anything that I suppose agencies are really looking for. And I know each agency is very different and have different risk appetites, but fundamentally, if there's a collective agreement on what agencies want to see. We've mentioned about real-time payslip verification check-in service, which is great, but I also think that's a starting point. That gives you a bit of an insight to make sure that the funds and payslips have been made and tax has been deducted. But you also want to see potentially a little bit more in terms of maybe the financial structure and stability of an umbrella company, because that changes depending on certain things. So if there's anything specific that any agencies on this webinar want to see, then please drop us a note and we'll consider adding that to our agency pack, which should be ready to go mid to late March, in time for the JSL changes. But I think we are all working towards making sure that we're transparent, making sure that we can give agencies information that they may want sooner than what they've maybe had in the past. Trying to build it automated so it's not manual and you can click on it as and when you need it. But ultimately, yeah, we're here to give agencies the real-time visibility information on everything, not just things that they might get from payslip checking services.
Brilliant, thank you. And we will finish off on this last question. So, to mitigate risk, is it possible for an agency to pay tax NI directly, therefore not waiting for the umbrella RTI?
I'm happy to start off on this one. Debs and Hannah happy to jump in. But I think for the agency to mitigate the risk and to pay the tax and NI, that ultimately means that you don't need to work with an umbrella company, or you can deduct the tax and NI at source and pay the umbrella company net, which again has been mentioned. I've heard discussions of this in the past. The use of umbrella companies goes far beyond just payroll. There's employment, there's potential commercial arrangements, there's benefits to workers. So I don't know whether there's two questions here as to whether did we see that workers will move towards agency payroll and the agency deducting it. And I think the questions on that will probably lead more towards the employment rights bill that's getting a lot of talk and noise at the moment in terms of day one rights and worker status review. But I think for me, umbrella plays a really significant role in the contingent marketplace. So I think umbrellas will still remain a very, very popular choice. They will still remain a very valued member and key factor in supply chains. Yes, you can mitigate risk by doing that yourself. Fundamentally, it's whether your payroll service can do the deductions that you are suggesting, whether that's a PAYE deduction or whether that's an umbrella deduction, because remember they're potentially paid a slightly different rate. One's an assignment rate, one's a gross pay. So it's all about whether your system can do that and also what extra work and liability might come from doing that yourself. So there is different ways workers can be paid. We know that, we understand that, but I definitely don't see these changes reducing the umbrella usage if you have the right processes, the right partners, and the right risk mitigation factors to be able to continue in the main business as usual. It's just a case you probably have a lot more access to information that umbrellas have paid the worker and paid the right taxes. So Hannah and Debs, I don't know if you want to add anything else onto that.
I will just add a little bit more if I may to that. I mean, one of the benefits working with an umbrella is that a worker may be on multiple assignments in the same week, might be working through multiple agencies. You won't necessarily have sight of that. If there's holiday pay that's being paid out in a week, statutory leave, etc., all of that's factored into the umbrella calculation when they work it out, apprenticeship levy, etc. So an agency kind of keeping that money and paying it across against the umbrella's PAYE reference, and kind of making sure that it's been paid isn't necessarily going to be the right number. You've also got things like expenses, and we haven't actually touched on expenses in this call. And while payslip the payslip verification tools add up, and they do a very good job adding up, they don't look at the processes behind the scenes. So they're not checking, has holiday pay, is that right? Pensions, are that right? You know, they'll look at the percentage and do the sums add up, but the actual reason behind it isn't there. Or expenses, have they been taxed correctly? And the only person who knows that really is the umbrella that's processing it based on the
Yeah.
checks and the validation that they've done.
Mm.
And that is, it's all back down to that transparency and checking. So asking, you know, should an agency be paying the tax and NI across and then sending the remaining money to the umbrella to pay across? I would be hesitant to say yes, that's a good idea. There's also the risk of, you know, put yourself in the umbrella shoes. Is the umbrella going to be comfortable knowing that the agency has definitely paid that money across? Because ultimately they are primary. You know, they are the ones on the hook as first point to make sure it's been paid. We've heard that, you know, in the industry, MSP suggesting that they'll just pay the money directly to the umbrella, not pay it to the agency, just pay the agency their margin, their cut, and pay the money directly to the umbrella, because then that gets rid of any potential risk against credit terms. And again, where we've heard
Right.
that, we've suggested it's not necessarily the best idea because it's affecting cash flow down the chain. But ultimately, everybody's risk mitigation and how they want to protect themselves is going to be different. I think it just goes back to what we said before. If you're working with an umbrella that you trust and you're getting evidence, you know, month on month, even potentially in some situations week on week, that it's been paid, and you're doing the best you can. And I think it is coming back to work with companies that you trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Does anyone have anything to add before we end? No? All good. Fabulous then. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate all of your time. So we hope this has given you some clear, practical insight into the upcoming changes and what this means for you. If you do have any follow-up questions, there will be an email sent out afterwards. And please don't hesitate to get in touch at inquiries@danbro.co.uk. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.